While retirement is generally seen as a time of relaxation and self-focus, God calls us to love, serve, and help others for a lifetime. He has been preparing us for this retirement season, literally our entire lives. In retirement, countless Christians enter a state of spiritual dormancy, not knowing how they are called to have an impact for God's kingdom. The Retirement Reformation seeks to encourage and empower the 50 million Christians approaching or in retirement to embrace the calling God has been preparing in them. When the world says it's time to stop, you can begin to have your greatest impact. Welcome to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation, where our goal is to journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him.
Did you know that when you retire, your calling doesn't retire? Your calling is a lifelong calling, and if you're still around, God isn't done with you yet. I know you're fully aware of what you retired from, but what did you retire to? You've tuned into iRetire4Him, the voice and resource of the Retirement Reformation, an organization dedicated to you, our listener, the retiree who loves Jesus and wants purpose for all of your days, especially the ones ahead of you. Bruce Bruinsma joins us today as the founder of the Retirement Reformation. He's here to encourage and walk with you through retirement. And I'm your host, Jim Brangenberg. Please check us out online where there's lots of resources, retirementreformation.org, retirementreformation.org. And on Facebook, same thing. Just look up Retirement Reformation. It's no joke when my retired friends say to me, growing old ain't for sissies. Growing older has all kinds of challenges that come with it, but also a ton of possibilities. In the last 60 years, retirement's gone from just a few years and sometimes just a few days to almost an average of 30 years. And sometime during these 30 years of retirement, a common theme arises. It's called isolation. Isolation leads to many bad things, such as loneliness, addiction, divorce, bankruptcy, and unfortunately, suicide. We can complete our 5-part series today, dealing with the impacts of isolation in our gray years. Today, we're going to talk about how isolation leads to suicide. Rest assured, we're going to bring you the truth, and in that truth, the freedom to walk away from suicidal thoughts and feelings that stem from isolation. Bruce, for decades, we've seen the number escalate for people committing suicide. With 3 wars fought in the last 3 decades, suicide among our veterans has skyrocketed. But you're saying today that isolation among our seniors not only causes loneliness, addiction, divorce, and bankruptcy, but it also leads to suicide in seniors?
According to the World Health Organization, Jim, and let me just read this paragraph for a moment. According to the World Health Organization, the global rate of suicide is highest in people aged 70 and over. In some countries, including the United States, suicide rates among older adults are significantly higher than the national average. And here's something that's kind of sobering, perhaps for you and me. Men are particularly affected. Data suggests that elderly men are more likely to die by suicide compared to their female counterparts. Then they add some statistics that go along with it. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention reported that the suicide rate among adults aged 85 and above in the U.S. was about 20 per 100,000 in 2020. However, in 2023, the figure rose to 24 per 100,000. That's a 20% increase. This data only scratches the surface of a deeper crisis as many suicide attempts go unreported. I mean, that's just, wow. We know that in many countries, particularly in Europe, where in fact assisted suicide is become the norm. There are a number of states in the U.S. where that is true. In Canada, that is true. And so it's becoming easier and easier to be able to choose that way out of the relational predicament that you have or the situational predicament that you have. And there's, probably 5 or 6 different key instigators that lead people to thinking of that as a solution.
Instigators or warning signs? Which side are we talking about here? So,
well, I think warning signs is a warning circumstances.
Okay,
would be good to do that. It's like, it's like when we talked about divorce. What's a warning sign? When couples go out for dinner and they spend their whole time on their phone and never talk to each other.
Right.
That's a warning sign. It's not a cause, it's a warning sign. But the causes of gray suicide, isolation that we've been talking about, and loneliness is number one on the list. I have no one to connect with, and I am so lonely. And how do I get out of my loneliness? Well, one option that we've talked about is you engage yourself with others that has meaning and purpose. If you choose not to do that, you just continue to sink and your world continues to shrink, and suicide then becomes an option. Obviously, physical health problems play a key role in that. As we struggle with physical health conditions, particularly in the mental area, not wanting to be a burden for others and not being able to see a way out for yourself, suicide then is something that we think about. Mental health disorders fit into that same category. And then we just talked about bankruptcy in our last segment, but financial, socioeconomic factors. You're in so deep financially, and what is one of the ways to get out of it is, well, leave this world. And then the fifth, many adults struggle with, what we talk about often is a lack of purpose following retirement. And so after 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 10 years of that isolation and loneliness and a lack of purpose to bring meaning, then how do I how do I escape all of this? Suicide then becomes an answer that they consider.
Have you experienced this personally? Have you had friends, senior friends, try to commit suicide or succeed?
If you, as most of the people that are listening are Christ followers and hopefully are attending church, when's the last time you heard someone say that somebody's father committed suicide? We never talk about it that way. My father died of a heart attack, of a heart congestion, of lung something or other. What they either don't know or don't share, that it was preceded by taking half a bottle of pills, and that what they actually did was kill themselves. And so I think there is so much more of that is happening all around us, but that is unreported. And because of that stigma that goes back into my youth, for sure. Matter of fact, is when Judy and I were talking about this topic, and she said, Bruce, when I was growing up, what we were taught was that if you committed suicide, you were going to go to hell. And so there's that thought process that is floating around out there. And the thought process is that if I take my own life, it's not in God's timing. That's the logic of that. But those things are fading away, and looking for a simpler solution seems to be the new model and the new mode.
Well, I think it might be embarrassing too to say that your parent committed suicide. That's kind of embarrassing to say they gave up on life, because it also makes it look like on you, like what could you have done to involve yourself in their life to keep them from feeling hopeless. There's just so many different factors. Bruce, there's got to be hope in this, and that's what I want to make sure we focus on in the third segment of today's show, because the world today doesn't offer a lot of hope. You've been out there, you've seen more of the world than I have, but the world doesn't offer a lot of hope, and money doesn't bring hope, and stuff doesn't bring hope, and the only thing that brings hope is Jesus. And I want to make sure we talk about that today in the show. Are there any other studies, since we're laying up the case, is there anything else you want to talk about and laying the case of, hey, here's the problem? Because I want to talk in the third segment about here's the solutions.
See once. Here we go. 45,979 Americans died by suicide, making it the 12th leading cause of death. And it is over 1/3 of people who died by suicide were 55 and older. So when it's approached as a health problem.
Yeah,
10% of adult Americans have thoughts about suicide, and 1.2 million Americans attempted suicide. And 54% of Americans have been affected by suicide in one way or another. That would be a family member, a friend, someone, an associate that you were dealing with. And we live in, Judy and I live in Colorado Springs, and the amount of suicide deaths of young people is just absolutely appalling and astounding. And then when you tie that with seniors, so you got young people who are hopeless and you got seniors who are hopeless. And the issues, I think, are probably fairly similar between them, although the younger ones are more relational and the older ones may be more financial or health related.
That's a lot of negative news, but there's hope. And we're going to deal with that hope and talk about how you can eliminate the isolation that leads to suicidal thoughts and leads to suicide, and how you can get help. You're listening to iRetire4Him. We'll be right back.
Recreating Retirement is an interactive small group study helping you to move from nothing to what's next. You can join us on Wednesdays at 6 p.m. East Coast time on Facebook Live. Our goal for this study is to provide a group setting for interaction and new ideas while leading you through a first step in your journey from retirement to reformation. Here's the big idea. During the next 5 years, 5,000 small groups will experience this journey of discovery in churches and faith-based organizations across the country. Is your church a place where recreating retirement needs to be planted? Join us online to experience the study or prepare to lead a small group at your church or ministry. Email us at contactus@retirementreformation.org or go to our website at retirementreformation.org. That's retirementreformation.org.
Hey, welcome back to iRetire4Him. We got a great middle segment. I got a friend of mine on the show today instead of Bruce's. We got Gordon Marcy today with us today from the Glorystone App. It's an application that we use on our iWork4Him website. And I love Gordon's story. Gordon comes to us from Houston, Texas, and he's of retirement age, somewhere in his 70s. Gordon Marcy, welcome to iRetire4Him.
Man, great to be with you. Always love talking with you, Jim, and great to meet you, Bruce.
So, Gordon, you might be old enough to be retired, but God's not done with you yet. What has God been using you for in these recent days?
Well, on a professional level, it's a long story, but 9 minutes, I'll keep it short. So I'll give you the clip notes.
You're a radio guy. You understand.
But in 2006, I was 54. I stepped away from a longtime career in Christian radio for a project that I thought was only going to last a year. That was my commitment to a consortium of Christian communicators and broadcasters to explore issues affecting Christian ministry and broadcasting. And that led me full bore into the digital distribution and data management of communication. And
Okay. Gordon, that's a lot of big words. And everybody listening is going, I have no idea what this guy's saying. What you do is you help Christian talk radio stations be relevant because you're making their content so much easier to access. You're downplaying it. You have helped Christian radio stations become cutting edge. Isn't that really what you're doing?
Well, the reason I prefaced it with that, because I didn't have a software background. And I knew about software, worked with software, but I certainly didn't have my hands on it and had never built a software product. So it was that initial project that God used to lead us in 2011 to start the Glorystone App, which is a software as a service, a product that enables broadcasters and ministries like iWork4Him to curate, organize, and distribute virtually any audio and YouTube video channels and playlists in the world from their own websites.
They would have to work.
Let me ask you a question, Gordon.
Yes.
So many of our listeners are on the couch thinking to themselves, I need to find something of meaning and purpose. So why did you think that you could go ahead and step into an area that you knew nothing about with software, and what What was going through your head at that point in time? What was God telling you?
Well, it was that introduction to software that planted the seed. Now, I'd had media in my background, for nearly my entire life. So that was, God working consistent with my life experiences. But as you say, not specifically in software development. In fact, my bride, Cindy, at one point said, "Do you have any idea what you're actually building?" I said, "Well, not exactly. I mean, I have a concept, but not exactly." But anyway, so some of the folks that were involved in that initial project steered me in the direction of using software for ministry. So that bug was planted, and then it really hit, full steam ahead when I discovered the ministry called Global Media Outreach. And they use online technology to do evangelism one-on-one. So that really put the whole concept of using a technology, software, a digital distribution of content, into the foreground for me. And then it was in 2011 that God specifically led us into starting the Glorystone App. So we're now 12 years into it. We have about 200. When the latest customers are onboarded, we'll have about 200 broadcasters and ministries under the umbrella of our service around the nation and in Canada.
But when you were in your 60s, were you not, when you started that?
So 2011, I was 58.
So you were pushing 60. Okay.
Yeah. So, but it's funny because when you're in software, though, Gordon, you're constantly reinventing yourself because software changes. And you look at where the web was in 2011 versus web is in 2023. There's a lot of changes. So you've had to keep relearning and relearning. Did anybody ever tell you, "Hey, you're too old to relearn, Gordon? You're 71 years old. You can't relearn anything. You should just walk away and retire"? That's not true, is it?
No, it's not. And, I just don't pay attention to that. I just keep plowing ahead, and if you walk with a, quick in your step, and God's given you your senses and your physical health, which is real important too, then there's no reason to stop. And it's just, I've always been a learner and an early adopter and an innovator and problem solver in my corporate career. And that's just translated into helping broadcasters and ministries solve problems with content distribution in this new era. And the folks that we're working with, many of them, in fact, all of them, have not, that's the reason our service is in existence, have not entered into the content distribution online. They may have content distribution over the air, for example, broadcasters, or they may distribute a few things from their website. But when we open the door to virtually any audio or video distributed in the world to be curated, organized, and distributed from their website, their eyes get opened, and that's what we help them do.
Very cool. So when you hang out with people at your church, you guys are involved in a church there in Houston, and you got other people that you hang out with that are probably in their 70s as well. Do they ever go, Gordon, when are you going to retire? When are you going to just check out and go on vacation and be retired? Do people ever say that stuff to you?
I got asked that in small group just the other night.
And what was your answer?
Well, first of all, there's no biblical principle, right? You guys know this, that a person should retire from work when he reaches a certain age. So I'll never retire. That was my answer to the question, at least in the sense that the world often defines it. Doing fun things is okay. And Cindy and I love to have fun, and we love to, be with our grandchildren, and we can do that more now that we're in Texas, where most of them are. But these never should be, and they aren't now, the primary focus of our lives. So as long as I have my health and God allows me to think straight, I'm going to continue to, I like the word refire instead of retire, for God's glory and our good.
Well, that's very encouraging because the message that our audience can take away is that you're never too old, and God never stops having a plan for you, and you can always respond regardless of which stage of retirement that you're in. Your story is very encouraging, Gordon.
So before we go today, I want you to share a word of encouragement for those people listening that are pre-retirees or maybe already into retirement when they're considering becoming active, becoming engaged, getting plugged in those years past 65. Give some encouragement.
Well, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord. That doesn't stop just because you leave, corporate life. So, get plugged into, where the Lord is at work, to quote a Henry Blackaby truism, and join him there. So just a few things that I was, thinking about in prepping for the conversation. First of all, if you're married, make your spouse a priority. And, if you're not already working together as a team, start. Cindy's the joy of my life. I'm the most blessed man alive because of it. And because I'm making her a priority and we're a team, this is shaping up to be the best season of our marriage. But it's not happening by accident. If you happen to be alone, and God's allowed you to be alone in this season, don't live in isolation. Your life work will be best when you're in fellowship with God and others. And then Cindy and I were in a church over the last year before we moved to our current church, and the pastor there interrupted a sermon series to talk on prayer. And that caused Cindy and I we prayed together privately, for years throughout our marriage, but we hadn't always prayed together. And out of that sermon series on prayer, we really felt convicted to start praying together as a couple again, and first thing in the morning. And that's turned into some of the richest, most productive, praying time of our lives. So I really encourage you, if you, to prioritize prayer. And if you're married, to start praying with your wife. If you're not, don't forsake the secret place of prayer, I guess is the thought.
Wow.
And then don't stop dreaming. Caleb is in the Bible from Joshua is one of my heroes. And if you don't know his story, look it up in Joshua. At 85 years old, he was still at it, right? He was ready for a brand new challenge, and he kept himself going and physically fit. The scripture says during the 40 years in the desert, he was part of that crew. But he was ready. He was ready for the opportunity when God opened the door. And what did he want to do? He wanted to take on the mountains and the giants up in the mountains. So he didn't take a namby-pamby job or just sitting off on the side. He took the toughest work there was. So don't stop dreaming or taking risks as long as you're physically fit and got your common sense.
Gordon Marcy, thank you so much for sharing your story today on iRetire4Him. If you want to check out Gordon online, check out GlorystoneApp.com, GlorystoneApp.com. We'll be right back talking more on iRetire4Him.
Our work on this earth doesn't end when the paycheck stops. God calls us to be faithful for a lifetime. Whether you're looking forward to retirement or you're already there, our all-small group study, Recreating Retirement, will help you understand, engage, and activate what God has for you in this fourth quarter of life. Join Retirement Reformation founder Bruce Bruinsma as you consider your past, strengths, spiritual gifts, and your passions, and how they all come together as the call God has for you in these years. Connect with us on our online community group at facebook.com/Retirement Reformation, Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern, or if you'd like to bring Recreating Retirement to your church, email us at contactus@retirementreformation.org. Are you ready to start your life-changing journey today?
Hey, welcome back to iRetire4Him. Dealing with kind of a tough subject today. Isolation that leads to suicide. Bruce, the numbers you stated right in the end of the first segment, right before we went into our guest segment, were staggering numbers, because we know that 36% of the population identifies as a born-again believer. So a lot of those numbers represent very large percentages of Christians. You said 1.2 million people attempted suicide last year. 36% of that's almost 500,000 people. That's a big number. You said that 47,000 almost succeeded at committing suicide. Well, 36% of that number ends up being almost 20,000 people. We know that this is impacting the Christian population as well as the greater population. But there's got to be hope. Suicide is one of those things that you don't think of your grandma and grandpa attempting suicide or committing suicide. They don't think about this. How can we help?
I think, Jim, there's some underlying solutions to all of the gray issues that we've talked about in the last, in our last 4 or 5 podcasts, whether we're talking about, bankruptcy, we're talking about divorce, all of those issues. There's a common theme that they are prompted when we withdraw into ourselves and isolation becomes our reality as our world shrinks. So what is the common answer that will take us out of those gray areas and into the sunlight of God's grace to us and finding meaning and purpose? And so I think it's the message of the Retirement Reformation that you're a unique person. You are called by God. He's prepared you to be able to be of service and to provide meaning and purpose in your life and to help build the kingdom. And when you are engaged in those relationships, then all the gray issues that we've talked about, as negative as they all are, will then not be part of our reality. If when you get out of bed in the morning, you've got a purpose, you've got a meaning, you've got people that you're going to interact with, that you are either going to impact who are going to impact you. You're involved in intergenerational prayer with young people at your church or single moms. You're involved in mentoring. You're involved in being a wraparound grandparent. All the different senior pathways that Retirement Reformation is attempting to be able to bring to you as possible next steps. But when you step into what God has called you to be, then all of these issues you'll never think about suicide, because you're anxious for the good that's going to be tomorrow. And you want to step into what God's preferred future is for you and not in that future in a really negative way.
How do you keep the health issues from getting you down, Bruce? How do you keep, because obviously as we get older, 55 plus, then becomes 65 plus, then becomes 75 plus, the body's wearing out. This was a temporary shell that God has given us. The new model that Jesus demonstrated after he resurrected from the dead is a lot cooler than this one. How do you deal with those medical setbacks? You had one last year. How did you keep yourself from growing discouraged?
Well, it's what it is that you focus on, as what you were alerting to was a very significant time of prostate cancer. And about 20% of all men are going to experience that in one form or another. So it really becomes a question of what are you going to focus on? What I've learned is that as it's more difficult for me to get out of the chair, as it's more difficult for me to walk to the gym, if it's more difficult to work out, my bones hurt, my muscles hurt. And if I focus on that, I'm going to be going down into a spiral. What is it that I can replace that downward spiral with that will in fact elevate me in my relationships? And I think there's 2 really key things, and there may be many more, but 2 of them that we can each connect with. First of all, build our relationship with God. So with our Bible study, with our prayer, with our Holy Spirit, when we're reading what David, the stories of David, and then we go to the Psalms, then we go to Proverbs and we see what's there. Then we take a look at what Solomon said in his, senior years of what he found to be the most important. So building our relationship with God and our understanding of what it is that he desires for us, that his love endures forever. When I know that his love endures forever, it's hard for me to feel sorry for myself because I've got somebody almighty who loves me and is doing that. Second is to grow in our emotional maturity, our ability to deal with difficult situations, to work with God's wisdom. I've got a young man coming into my office here in about 20 minutes. And he's going to ask me, what's the most important thing I've learned in my life? And I'm going to tell him those 2 things: to be able to operate with God's wisdom, and secondly, to grow in my emotional maturity so that I can deal with people, circumstances, and situations in ways that don't get me down, but are encouraging to others and gives me a path forward rather than a hole to continue to dig and to fall into.
Bruce, one of the things, so speaking at it from the younger part of the retirement people that we talk to, I'm 57 years old and just recently moved my parents to live next door to me. And what I saw is, they spent the last 25 years in a retirement community, a golf community. And when they were golfing, when my dad was golfing and they were going to the club to have dinner with people and they were having neighborhood get-togethers, they were fine and connected. But then my mom couldn't move around as much as she wanted to. And my dad really couldn't play golf as much as he wanted to. And eventually they ended up isolated on a mountain in the desert of Arizona. And they had church on Sunday, but they lived so far from everybody else, they didn't have any interaction. And what I'm seeing is that that isolation became very negative for them. We've moved them to live next door to us here in Missouri, and they're I see my mom moving around better. They're able to drive safe places now where they can go do a little shopping, and they're getting involved in a new small group, which that was hard for them, but they've got daily interaction with Martha and I, and that's an encouragement to them. And I think that's something we as kids can do. It's tough. It interrupts everything that we were up to. But our parents just needed some interaction. They needed relationship. And that's something when we look at things we can do, you know what? Don't let your parents get stuck in a retirement community where they aren't connecting with people anymore. Get them back in your life.
What I learned with that, when you go into a retirement community, by the time let's say you go in at, I'll just say 65, and by the time you're in your late 70s, you got to have a plan to get out of there, because it will not serve the purposes that you thought it would when you got there. Now you've got multiple levels. You've got multiple levels of care, and so you got to deal with those. But it's complex, Jim.
Well, I'm not even talking about those kind of retirement. I'm talking about 55 plus homeowners association.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm not talking about senior communities where you can move.
You're talking about Sun City.
I'm talking about Sun Cities of America, which there are 100,000 of those communities. They provide really, they start with isolation because you're isolating yourself from all the young people. And as retired people, we need to be pouring our lives into young families. That's going to keep you younger and keep you from being isolated if you just pour your lives. Move into a neighborhood full of young families and be the old people. That's what people need to do. Bruce, we're almost out of time. I know that you've identified some organizations that people can connect with if they're dealing with suicidal thoughts or they're dealing with, maybe they've had to deal with a suicide in their own family. Are there some organizations you've identified that people can connect with?
Now, what I'd like to do, just please just send me an email and let me connect with you individually on that. Okay. You can send it to bruce@retirementreformation.org. bruce@retirementreformation.org. We'd be happy to talk with you and then connect you with some places that can be of real help. But remember, the key is your relationship with God and then your relationship with others. And then secondly, work on, read a book on your emotional maturity and the difference that will make in the decisions that you make and the way you feel about yourself and the decisions that you're making there. God loves you and God will continue to love you. And so love yourself enough to be able to pour yourself into others.
Yeah. And meet Jesus. Jesus is there for you. The only hope that is permanent in life comes through Jesus. It's fantastic. Great conversation, Bruce, on a tough subject. I'm sorry we even have to talk about it, but hopefully this conversation is brought to reality to people listening that are younger, that have parents still around that may be struggling with this, and they can have an open conversation. And for those of us just to recognize we can't be isolated. We got to be surrounded by others who share a faith in Christ and can encourage us. You've been listening to iRetire4Him, the voice and resource of the Retirement Reformation with founder Bruce Brynsma. Please check us out online, retirementreformation.org. And if you really struggle in some of these areas, email Bruce at retirementreformation.org. I'm your host, Jim Brangenberg. We're Christ followers stretching our faith in our retirement years so we can end our years by saying,
I retire
for Him.
Thanks for listening to I Retire for Him with your hosts, Jim and Martha Brangenberg, and Retirement Reformation founder, Bruce Brynsma. iRetire4Him is the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation. Most Christians tend to follow the world's pattern of rest and self-pampering during retirement. However, in your retirement, you can be focused on God's unique call to love, serve, and help others. This can be your best season of life if you take advantage of a life's worth of knowledge and experience and combine it with a greater freedom of time and money and invest it all in the generations both preceding and following you. The Retirement Reformation is encouraging Christians to find and follow God's call in all seasons and aspects of life, especially in retirement. Take time to sign the manifesto at retirementreformation.org and explore the wealth of resources available on our site. Join this movement of God and journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him. Go to retirementreformation.org.